Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Andrew Knox in for Gordon today. Illegal immigration is now the top issue in America. Both former President Trump and President Biden traveled to the border yesterday to take political shots at each other over this crisis.
Well, Biden called for Republicans to pass the Senate border bill, while Trump argued the border was secure while he was president. Brody Carter has the story.
The operation that they showed me is nothing less than incredible. And I'll say this, it's a military operation. I mean, we have this is like a war.
Illegal border crossings are at a record high with 2.2 million apprehensions in 2023, roughly 250,000 in December alone. A new monthly record during a visit to Eagle Pass, Texas, sometimes called Illegal Pass. Former President Trump placed the blame for the crisis squarely on the current president.
But this is a Joe Biden invasion. This is a Biden invasion over the past 3 years. I call him Crooked Joe because he's crooked. He's a terrible president, the worst president our country's ever had.
300 miles away in Brownsville, Texas, President Biden called on Trump to rally Republicans on Capitol Hill to help pass a bipartisan bill worth more than $20 billion to crack down on border crossings. A bill blocked by the overwhelming majority of GOP senators once they saw what it said.
So here's what I would say to Mr. Trump. Instead of telling members of Congress to block this legislation, join me, or I'll join you in telling the Congress to pass this bipartisan border security bill.
Biden saying the Border Patrol needs more help.
They desperately need more resources, need more agents, more officers, more judges, more equipment in order to secure our border.
Conservatives point out the president has worked to repeal Trump's border policies in lieu of what Biden called more humane ones, specifically ending the Remain in Mexico policy and others, which they warned would likely lead to a crisis. And Thursday, Trump talked how Georgia student Laken Riley was killed by an illegal immigrant and other criminal actions by illegals.
Spoke to the parents of an incredible young lady, and you saw her the other day. You saw what happened the other day in Georgia. And the parents are devastated.
57% of registered voters say Trump would do a better job of securing the border in an NBC poll, compared to 22% for Biden. Meanwhile, as Trump and Biden talked about the border crisis, a federal judge in Texas blocked a new law that would give police broad powers to arrest migrants suspected of illegal entering the U.S. The Texas Attorney General's office reportedly appealed that ruling immediately. And for Trump, a surprise, as he ran into evangelist Franklin Graham while on a runway in Texas. Graham is on an evangelistic tour along the border. Biden's visit is strategically positioned before the State of the Union address, aiming to maximize political impact and draw stark contrast with Trump's immigration stance. However, the administration's approach to this crisis is once again under fire from Republicans after the White House referred to illegal immigrants simply as newcomers. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Well, for President Biden, it may be perceived as too little too late. And if you are into American politics, you had a good time watching Trump and Biden throw jabs at each other from 300 miles away. And more than likely, we will see them on the debate stage together not too far off, and that will be interesting. In other news, the White House is calling for an investigation after dozens of Palestinians were killed in a stampede yesterday. Ephraim Graham has that story and more from our CBN newsroom. Ephraim.
Andrew, it happened in the early morning. There are reports more than 100 Palestinians died in the mob around aid trucks in northern Gaza. Some are blaming Israeli forces. Paul Strand has more on what happened and Israel's response.
The White House labeled the deadly incident caught on camera by Israeli military drones tremendously alarming and called for an investigation. It appears most who died were crushed by a crowd rushing the trucks, or were run down as those trucks, driven by Gazans, began to flee the mob scene. In a separate incident, a few Gazans were apparently shot as a large crowd charged toward Israeli soldiers nearby. A U.S. aid official immediately criticized Israel.
Desperate civilians trying to feed their starving families should not be shot at.
But an Israeli military spokesman talked of Gazans being killed by their own neighbors, not the IDF.
Thousands of Gazans dispensed upon the trucks. Some began violently pushing and even trampling other Gazans to death, looting the humanitarian supplies.
Hagari says in the midst of much chaos, shots fired by IDF soldiers were only meant to disperse an angry mob and were never aimed at stopping the aid reaching Gazans.
No IDF strike was conducted towards the aid convoy.
The American Jewish Committee Global Voice reported of the more than 100 killed, fewer than 10 were shot. Reports continue to say Hamas is hijacking much of the aid. Meanwhile, ever more hungry, desperate Gazans are still camping out along aid routes. This man saying, quote, "I can't wait till my child dies from famine." In Beirut, Lebanon, an angry mob demanded more aid be allowed to reach Gazans, blaming Egypt for holding up more than 2,000 aid trucks near the Rafah crossing. This protester said, quote, "We will not allow Gaza to starve. We will not allow further genocide to occur." In the latest terrorist attack in Israel, a 57-year-old rabbi and a 16-year-old hitchhiker were shot dead in Samaria Thursday by a Palestinian Authority policeman turned terrorist.
He shot two of our residents where they were here in the gas station. One of our residents came from a hummus shop right here and killed the terrorist.
Amid all this, the Israeli military is carrying out its mission against Hamas, reporting that it's now killed 13,000 terrorists in the war in Gaza. Meanwhile, it appears talks to free hostages held in Gaza remain stalled. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel will free them one way or another.
Thanks to the combination of military pressure and tough negotiations, we succeeded in returning alive 112 of our hostages. We're determined to return them all. With or without an outline, we will fight until total victory.
Paul Strand, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Here at home, advocates for religious freedom are dealing with an uptick in threats and providing legal and media resources to people and institutions of faith. CBN's Heather Sells shows us why this protection is critical in the face of lawsuits, vandalism, and smear campaigns.
So often, Christians and other people of faith feel really besieged right now.
Religious Freedom Institute President Eric Patterson and other advocates no longer just concentrate on persecution overseas. That is because of growing threats against all faiths here at home.
They feel besieged by neo-Marxism, by wokeism, by the sexual orientation and gender ideologies that seem to be pressing a new view that nothing is real, there's no male, there's no female.
Attacks include legal fights, hostile legislation, workplace backlash, and vandalism. The Religious Freedom Institute reports criminals attacked more than 60 pro-life organizations following the Supreme Court's decision that ended Roe v. Wade. It also points to attacks against Catholics and a dramatic spike in U.S. anti-Semitism since the October 7th Hamas massacre. Adding to this perfect storm, an aggressive cancel culture and expanding government power.
Here's the basic model. It is using the power of the state, whether in an unelected Human Rights Commission, as they're so-called in Colorado, or using new interpretations of federal code, as we've seen with Title IX.
At the heart of many attacks, a belief that expression of faith should be limited.
What you'll often hear is, oh, it's okay for you to worship. There's freedom to worship, which means you can do that behind closed doors at home, as long as you don't offend me.
To protect all people of faith outside of their homes, religious freedom advocates have begun to encourage the proactive use of resources, such as media guides and legal kits.
They need practical counsel, and they're crying out for it.
Attorney Bernadette Broyles, president of the Child and Parental Rights Campaign, helps pastors and faith-based leaders seeking ministry and legal help for a wide range of situations. Many revolve around gender. Her group's new Church Transgender Guide offers ministries advice, including a close look at governing documents.
It is far better to embrace a biblical worldview and to document that and to be unapologetic about that. That is far more protective legally in the long run.
In this political season, Patterson says, look for candidates who argue for protection of faith and conscience for all. And he recommends leaning on the ways of Christ and offering hope to others.
This is really a time for engaging love with our neighbors, inviting people over for dinner, getting to know them, listening, and just being loving about our faith and our perspective at this time.
Heather Sells, CBN News.
We turn now to the wildfire in the Texas Panhandle, which has grown into the largest in the state's history. Investigators say the Smokehouse Creek fire grew Thursday to nearly 1,700 square miles, scorching rural rich ranch lands and destroying homes. That fire has merged with another blaze and is only 3% contained. It isn't known what started the blaze, which has burned since Monday and grown with extreme speed. The full extent of the damage remains unknown. At least one person has died. CBN's Operation Blessing is on the ground working to establish base operations to bring disaster relief and providing sandwich lunches to people while waiting for the mobile kitchen to arrive, along with praying for those who've been affected by the fires. And that work continues even as we speak. Andrew.
Thanks, Ephraim. Unfortunately, the strong winds are supposed to increase over the next couple of days. And when you look at the square miles of what all these fires have done, it's roughly the size of Delaware and only 3% contained. So it could be a very long weekend. Let's keep everyone in prayer.